ink on paper, vision, mission, values, ink on paper. Very few companies sit there and they very few of them infuse everything that they do, from emails to communications to meeting to decision making to environment to engagement. They don't talk about those values, but they look great on paper. They look good in front of our investors and maybe our customers. It's the fastest way to lose your credibility, both as a leader or as an organization.
Hi, this is your PM Cowboy coming back to you with our 42nd podcast. As always, I'm incredibly excited and proud to present today's guest. He's a reoccurring guest. Hayssam, welcome.
Thank you so much,
Mark. He and I know each other for quite some time. I don't just value him as a new won friend that we met over 2 years ago, but I always find it really, really engaging to have conversations with him on a multitude of different topics. We've had him once before on the topic of leadership, and where I thought we did a good job of kind of entertaining some of the key elements of leadership. But the purpose of the podcast here is not only to kind of do the surface of it, but try to dig deeper. The purpose of the podcast is to cover topics like project management, PMOs. I'll go ahead and share a slide that kind of shows this, right? Here are some of the topics we might cover. Project management, program management, portfolio management. You can see Hayssam there on leadership. We do agile, we do artificial intelligence, we talk about ethics and sustainability. We've talked about change management, startup companies, nonprofit, soft skills, communication, innovation, all that kind of stuff are things that we talk about. The actual purpose of the podcast is not just to be kind of something that you listen to while you're working out. That would be great if you do. But to really save you, some of you see the books behind me there. Those are actual real books, and people often ask me how many of them have I read. I'll be honest, not all of them, but maybe about 60%. This podcast is to help a lot of you professionals that might not have the time to go through the wealth of amazing topics that are out there, an easier way to kind of digest some of these topics. So we focus on all the managers and leaders out there that want to learn. And the topic today, Hayssam, is leadership, right? I've chosen you for this topic because you're not only a gregarious and an intellectual in the subject matter, but you are a subject matter expert. You've been coaching, mentoring, teaching, developing leaders throughout the world as individuals, but also helping organizations develop their leadership. And that's kind of what we're trying to focus on in this podcast. If you're an executive in a company, you should be asking yourself the question, are we ready for the 21st century? What does this mean for leadership? What kind of leadership culture do we have? Is there a way of measuring it? Is there a process? Is there a framework? We want to kind of get away from this philosophical discussion that everybody loves about leadership. Yeah. We talk about it, but there's no nuts and bolts. There's nothing tangible, which makes it also easier for companies and people to kind of not go through the checklist. So welcome, Hayssam.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's always great to be on your show, and we've had multiple conversations off camera. We talk about things that we're both passionate about, and leadership is one of them.
Yeah. Let's kind of start off. You did the introduction last time. For those of you who want to know who Hayssam is, look at the other podcast. He did his passion journey there. I don't want to cut you off what that's concerned. Yeah. But there's so much that I'd like to cover with you in this podcast. I want to use the time as effectively and efficiently on the topic. Let's start off with this underlying principle. Leadership is ubiquitous. Everybody talks about it. Everybody says it's important. But if I'm going to use the classic Edward Deming's quote, that which you cannot measure cannot be improved. I don't want to make it too nuts and bolty, but I kind of miss in the modern leadership culture this awareness. Is there a structure? Where do I start as an individual? How do I do leadership on a strategic level, on a tactical level, on an operational level? How can I make my company fit for leadership? So let's kind of just jump into the thick of things.
Okay.
You're a CEO of your own company, so you have plenty of leadership stories there. But I'm also interested in one of the reasons why I wanted to use you in this podcast is because this is something that you do on a daily basis. So let's start off maybe with the easy stuff. Where do you see, from your perspective and also from the perspective of your clients, the biggest needs or pain points that they discuss when dealing with their leadership challenges in this century?
Yeah, that's a very good question and a quite a broad one as well. I'll tell you what I'm going through at the moment. I'm dealing with a couple of regional players, some in the banking industry, some government. And the question was always is, how do we develop them? How do we measure the efficacy of our leadership? And what model do we use? And for me, I would say it's really difficult to answer all three questions because like you said earlier, you can't just take leadership and put your finger on it. And there's a lot of ways to measure your leadership style. You can do psychometric assessments. You can dive deeper into your psyche, and you can work with a coach, and you can get somebody to. There's a million ways to let you know what kind of leader you are. However, organizations need results. They need to see something that's tangible, correct? So we can talk about a million models of leadership, and some of them are amazing, but how do we put it into action? So for me, it's going back to basics. I always say that if you want to become a great leader, you need to have some basics. And basics for me is that you put your mouth where your money is, or the other way around, right? So for example, as a leader, what is required of me to become a great leader? Like what are those things I need to do? So people see, in terms of tangibility, they see action. So for me, as my team, they look at me and I'm constantly on stage and they see, what is my fearless leader doing now in this project, in that strategic objective? What is he doing? How is he behaving? How is he communicating? That's what you put your finger on the pulse of the leader and ultimately your organization. So model and format, I have one. Yes, and that's the one that I use and I've been using for years, ever since I started my journey in 2002, and that's been the model that I've using. Obviously, it evolved with the changing with the changing times and what's happening to the future of leadership and AI, what's happening locally in the region, and what are those hot topics. But the one thing that is evergreen are 7 leadership capabilities that are evergreen. And I think they withstand the test of time no matter what they are. And that's the toolbox that I always talk about. That if you want to be a great leader / manager / CEO, director, whatever it is, whenever you're leading, there's 7 evergreen qualities / competencies that you need to master. Those are non-negotiable whatsoever. And that's based on something called the team performance model. And I took that and I said, well, hold on a second. We are so fond and we hear about, data and dashboards and how do I put my finger on the pulse of my organization? So the dashboard for me is a team performance model. At the end of the day, I want my team and my organization to perform and to deliver results. Now, what happens along the way, as we say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Or the stairway to heaven. Highway,
exactly.
Highway to heaven
Yeah. So that's the model I use, and I can break it down step by step.
I definitely want to share the model that you shared with me. I think it's important. But let's get back to this underlying premise that we had entering this podcast. Okay.
Yes.
And I'm going to use a different model to kind of link it to. My big thing is project management, amongst other things, right? We have the PMBOK guide as a guiding principle, right? And one of the things that the PMBOK guide does, although some people might find it boring, but it's incredibly valuable. It creates a visual graphic of the elements, the moving parts of what makes the discipline of project management. Okay. Now, it acknowledges the fact that there's an ever dynamic field that's growing and expanding, but so that we have a basic, it uses terms like framework and foundational concepts, right? And I think you alluded to that a little bit. At the bottom, the framework is what I guess Stephen Covey would refer to as principles, right? Principle-based leadership. What do we stand for? What's our vision? What's our mission? What are our values, right? Because who cares what system you're using if you don't know why and who we are, right? And then on top of this, we have like a framework, like a raw building framework that consists of pillars, right? With milestones. And it consists of knowledge areas. And you already talked about it. I think a lot of people, when they talk about leadership, they say, if I want to become a better leader, I need a collaboration workshop. Yeah, well, collaboration is one ingredient of it, but it's not the comprehensive thing of it, right? So my question to you, is it possible to have a comprehensive framework where we have a good overview of what are the capabilities, what are the principles, what I do on an operational, tactical, and strategic level, so it kind of comes together? Is that possible?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And for me, any piece of information has to be practical. Any model framework has to be tangible, and has to give me a clear indication. Am I doing the right thing here? Because let me tell you one thing: every executive that I work with, that I coach, every manager that I train, they all think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Or they're doing the best they can, which is an alternative,
Well, of course, and that's the best I can. With the best I can is the thing that they know that they're doing. And let me tell you, who's really more open to being coached are people that are on top of their game.
Yeah.
A lot of people feel that they come to us when they are failing. Actually not. 90% of people come to us, or people who are on the top and want to maintain that level of performance. They say, I need a coach to help me sustain that level and to become a better version of myself. So that's the first thing, is your mindset as a leader has to be, I didn't get there by luck. I got there with hard work. What can I do to sustain it? Rather than, unfortunately, what I see a lot, like, well, I didn't get here by doing nothing. You see what I mean? And therefore they get to the top and they feel that they've reached the pinnacle of their success, and they stay there, and eventually they're going to, it becomes entropy and deterioration.
You've kind of triggered me, and I want to go into resonance with what you said. Funny enough, regardless of what topic I coach or consult or train, and I think this is, for the listeners, an important quality as well. My experience is the people who know the most, who are the most professional, who have come the furthest, are sometimes the best students. And I think you would agree with me that also in your leadership thing, I think it's a give and take. It's kind of like a dance between the coach and the coachee, right?
No, you're right. You're right.
You learn from them, but I agree with you. The people that are on top of their game, I'm often intimidated when I go into certain relationships where I'm like, what are these people going to learn from me? I mean, they have like 20 years of experience, and then I'm totally amazed on how engaged the conversation is and how we're learning from one another, and their barriers are much further down than some of the more lower mature. I don't mean this in a judgmental sort of way. Maybe not so far in their journey. They're the ones who push back, which I think is a legitimate part of the learning process, right? And then the other thing that you said that also I think is important to understand, and I think this is a conversation unto itself. A lot of people think if we are at the moment successful in our business, then we have good leadership. And that is not always true. I think you can be successful at the moment. I don't think you can be long-term without good leadership. But this mentality, listen, I wouldn't be where I am unless I would be a good leader. You know, there's other qualities that get you to the front of the room. But I think it's leadership that keeps you there. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and listen, I yesterday I was sitting down with my team. I said, could you give me the list of all the clients that I'm coaching and all the clients where their contracts have expired, and what can I do to come back and continue working with them? And I thought to myself, Actually, I'm going to filter that. I'm going to filter the clients that I enjoyed working with. 2, that are open-minded, because those are the clients, and those are the leaders who view themselves as eternal students of leadership. But they're eternal students. However, there's a difference between an eternal student who's always learning and never performing,
that's
and
another
never delivering, versus an eternal student who's always learning to make sure that they evolve and they become a better version of themselves. You got these leaders who have 15 certificates hanging behind them, and then you sit with them. Half of those competencies are not being displayed when you see them dealing with their team and their staff, and you think to yourself, that's the ultimate way to stab yourself in the foot and lose your credibility by claiming you are somebody.
So what you were saying that
not really
is, I would absolutely agree with you, and I have this one case in the back of my head. There's even certain leaders that are incredibly well read, and if you say something to them, right, they'll say, I know where that's from such and such book from this and this author, and then they'll even sometimes be in a position. I've actually had this one particular person, I think, said, yeah, but you did it wrong. The sequence is such and such and such, which is, sometimes if we're talking about processes that are derived from certain principles, you can do one way or the other. But I always kind of smile, because I'm like, you know what, you're so incredibly well read, and you can quote back to me where my statements are coming from, but you don't understand them. There's not a cognitive link to and you're not practicing them. And even worse, a colleague of mine was recently in a seminar, and he said, no matter what concept he presented, they go, we've heard that before, it doesn't work, move on. Right?
Yeah.
So it's one thing to be open to knowledge. It's another thing to actually to integrate it, to understand it, right?
Exactly. And I find a lot of leaders, especially, and we're talking about leaders at the top.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of challenges here. First of all, it's extremely lonely at the top.
Yes, it is.
And I'm talking at the very, very top.
Yeah.
Number 1. Number 2 is that a lot of leaders develop a certain animosity towards their teams. Do you know why? Because all they hear is yes, yes, sir, yes, yes, ma'am. And there's a lot of yes people. So then I then look down at my team when my team is just giving me the yes. So then third, I become thirsty for someone to say, and I'm talking about good leaders here, thirsty for someone to tell me, hey, listen, boss, what you're telling me right now is a bunch of BS. All right, so, call me out.
Yeah.
And nobody calls me out. And if I want to be called out, I'm not talking about, again, I'm putting myself in some of those, myself in the shoes of some of those leaders. If somebody calls me out correctly, then I go, all right, that's the kind of person that I want. But again, at the end of the day, do I allow for such environment to happen, and do I just complain about it and say nobody's calling me out? Well, you need to be the kind of leader that creates that environment where people can call you out without your ego being injured, and you have to keep it in check.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And
Yeah.
Fourth is there's not enough time for them to work on themselves in a structured, classical kind of sense, that I go and attend these wonderful workshops and maybe hire a coach, which is sometimes a challenge in itself, to hire the right coach. So it is a catch-22 situation here. So and this is why we're talking about it today. So what's the solution? How do I make sure that I'm a great leader? And what's the best way to keep my fingers on the pulse of my organization and to keep myself in check, keep a reality check for myself, and making sure that my team is performing at above par?
Yeah.
What are those steps? What are those stages I have to be aware of? And that's what I usually deliver to all of my leaders, whether it's on one-on-one or in coaching sessions or in my master classes, which the model that we discussed earlier.
What you're referring to is a huge cornerstone of leadership principles, and it kind of is based on what style of leadership is lived from the top. Is it kind of an autocratic leadership where all decisions and all ideas have to come from you. Those don't principally work because it's impossible to know everything at the top. The more you are at the top, the less you know. And I don't mean this disrespectfully, but that's just a fact that, if you can't rely on the wisdom of your subject matter experts, you've got an issue. The other thing that I would absolutely agree with you that I often hear is, I think in society there's a lot of finger pointing. From the bottom we point to the top. It says, I don't see you, I don't feel you. It's kind of this remote leadership principle. I need you to be more of a leader. I need you to kind of motivate me and show me the way. I think that's a lot of leaders are afraid of that because of the potential ramifications of being too upfront. Then your failures are easy to be seen. And then from the top, I would absolutely agree with you, especially some of the leaders that you would presume are the ones who would appreciate the least a counter opinion from the bottom are the ones who say for themselves, I wish that my staff was more empowered and that they were proactive and that they would take the lead. I absolutely agree with you. I think that saying yes is one of the classical hallmarks of a poor leadership culture. On the other hand, saying no is also a problem. You and I both worked in luxury hotel business a long, long time ago. We learned this a long time ago. Don't say yes if you can't deliver. Don't avoid saying the word no. So the alternative. What's the alternative? And that's what leaderships are looking. Leadership is looking for that alternative, right?
I mean, look. I'll give you a perfect example. And I've about a year ago, I ended a contract with a company, a leading real estate company. I was brought in by the senior leader of the organization to do culture change and culture shift and etc. And I was really coveted, come work for us, Hayssam. We want you to come work with us. We've seen what you've done. And then, from the first and second month, it was a 2-year contract, by the way. It's the first and second month. It seemed like this leader was like, he put so much effort to bring me on board to both work with him and his team for better transformation. But then this specific leader, that the minute you sit down with him, as if it was his absolute goal in life was to prove everybody wrong and he's right. And mind you, he can put up a good argument to the point where he stunned the creative genius of his team, including mine. I'm like, yeah, well, I'm just going to be really difficult to work with somebody like this. And therefore, the project didn't come to fruition. It was just steps before fruition because you cannot work with a leader that thinks he's got all the answers. Yeah. You can't do that. Yeah. Right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Even if your answers are the right answers, even if you have all those spot-on answers and spot-on solutions that hit the nail, you still cannot be the person who makes all the decisions better than everyone else. At least don't make them feel that way, Yeah. And that's why certain organizations, including that one, have faced a lot of challenges and continue to face a lot of challenges. Yeah. So here, I want you to hear me out here a little bit, and this is something that, so when it comes to the responsibility of the leader that I was just talking about, right? So we hear the responsibility of the leader is to create that environment. The responsibility of the leader is to make sure that the vision is clear and then he rallies the masses behind that vision and etc. And I'm with that. However, one of the things we need to talk about as well is also to send a message out there is what about the responsibility of the team towards the leadership?
Absolutely.
I mean, not only because if you say, hey, the teams should only serve leaders, then you know what kind of leader that we become. So it has to be a two-way street. My responsibility towards my organization and my team. And what about the responsibility of my team towards me? Why do we always have to burden the leader to do everything? I mean, come on. Yeah. Leaders and team members are one unit. They are symbiotic.
You're speaking about one of the underlying paradox principles of leadership. We often use the pyramid to kind of show the leadership, but if we really rely on the top of the pyramid to carry the base, if you were to turn that pyramid on its head, the that whole staff would crush upper leadership. Leadership is not something that is reserved for the top 1% of the organization. Leadership is something that really has to go onto multiple different layers.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And if you don't create an environment that encourages that understanding, and also the understanding of self-responsibility, that even the smallest individual in an organization contributes to the overall quality of leadership that is felt by externals and internals. I often say, I think one good example of this is, I'm sure you're familiar with this system called Six Sigma. It was popular several decades ago, and what I liked about the Six Sigma approach was they said, you know what, if you want to use Six Sigma, it's not something that one person is using. You can't designate one person and say, hey, you're the Six Sigma captain, and you're responsible. It's something that the whole organization has to carry, not on an individual basis, but on a specific individual roles, and that's what creates culture. And that's why they used to train, black belts on certain levels, green belts on other, yellow belts on other. They understood that, you have to light the fire on multiple ends of the organization so that it inflames the whole organization in a constructive, positive, warm sort of culture way.
There you go. Same thing when it comes to leadership.
If you leave it to a handful of people, I think what, the famous quote from Einstein, that you can't keep doing the same thing and expect a better result, right? So if you want to be prepped for leadership, you have to understand that leadership is something that has to be distributed over the organization. Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. Let's slowly move towards your model, because I also want people to take away a visual and a structure that, where they say, okay, what are some of the bells and whistles that we can take a look at? So let's put this into a scenario, and you've done this several times. You're asked by a CEO to come into the company, often because of your reputation, right? Yeah. They call you because you're not like the others. You speak back. You don't always tell them what they want to hear, but you tell them what they need to hear in a diplomatic sort of way, right? Which I think a good leader always loves somebody who stands up to them in a positive sort of way.
While maintaining dignities and respect, absolutely. But I don't sugarcoat anything for anyone.
So a CEO comes to you and say, "Listen, I don't feel that the leadership. Besides, and leadership is an evolving thing. It can go up and can go down. A leader comes to you and says, Hayssam, our leadership culture is lacking. Okay, where do you start?
As the Japanese say, the fish rots from the head first.
Oh yeah, that's a famous German saying too. Yeah,
Ishikawa.
Yeah.
And the first thing I ask them is what are you doing about it?
So you start at the top
before you seek my counsel. What are you doing about it?
So you start at the top.
Tell me
Very
how
good.
Yeah. So I'll definitely start at the top. Once I start at the top, I understand I then go to the very bottom, because the heart and soul of an organization is at its front line, my dear brother.
Yeah.
You observe the front line and you see exactly what the front line is doing, and how are they doing it, and you can get your analyze sentiment and talk to people at all different levels. And I go from top immediately to the front line, which are the people that are right there up front, center, front of clients and customers, and then I'll see, where is that gap, man? What's going on? I mean, look, a lot of leaders speak a big game on vision and strategy, but does your front line see it?
Yeah.
Do they understand it? Do they know why they're doing it? Do they know why am I sitting here talking to these clients and to these customers, and do I speak your language, Mr. Leader? Yeah. And often there's a huge disconnect. I'm telling you that right now.
One of my favorite books, I have it over here, from Stephen Covey, where he talks about the 8th habit. He kind of talks about this phenomenon where, I think it was from Stephen Covey, who said that when he interviews executives, he always asks them, do they have a vision? Do they have a mission? Do they have values? And the answer is usually yes. I was recently at an industrial company, and in the training room that I was in, right? They had all their values up there, and they were beautiful values, right? And we were talking about this, where's the bridge between the vision and the action? And we were discussing this, and I said, do you guys believe in these values? And they go, yes, we believe in the values. And I said, okay. And then I went around the circle and said, I want you to pick one of these values and tell me where you live this value on a daily basis. You can imagine what kind of response I got, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
I can tell you a similar story, which is absolutely hilarious. I was brought in to do a series of mini workshops for this organization to align their culture and to align their different melting pot of nationalities and to say, can we please use our values? Because all nationalities that we have must be bound together through the values of respect and, respect and understanding and patience and all. It was about that. And it was 2 sessions per day, one morning session and one afternoon session. And the first session was late because of whatever it is, so we had to spill over like another 5 minutes into the second session while the second group was waiting outside, and their leader, who by the way was responsible to organize these things, comes barging into the room yelling at me and everybody else as why we are 7 minutes late. And I had to stop and finish, and took him to the side and I said, I will not move forward with this because I sound like your mouthpiece,
your pit bull,
spewing out a bunch of bullshit that you are not living. So I think I want to say thank you very much. I will not be your talking head talking about what is respect and understanding. And I said, what are you doing? I said, I would then prefer to say no thank you very much because I'm not representing your principles and values, and it actually becomes more detrimental. People sit there and shake their head and go, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that sounds good. What was it really happening? So, and we see that quite a lot. Ink on paper, vision, mission, values, ink on paper. Very few companies sit there and they very few of them infuse everything that they do, from emails to communications to meeting to decision making to environment to engagement. They don't talk about those values, but they look great on paper. They look good in front of our investors and maybe our customers. It's the fastest way to lose your credibility, both as a leader or as an organization.
If I were to use an analogy from project management, this is something that drives my passion to always. For me, I agree with you. For me, it's the link between the top of the organization all the way through the organization to the bottom. I find a lot of executive leaders are great at expressing a vision, and those visions are beautiful and they make sense. But I'm always fascinated that they don't understand, just like the pyramid is narrow at the top, once you move down to make it happen, the vision turns into a mission, which turns into a program, which might turn into an initiative or a project, which might turn into phases, which might break down into work packages, which might break down into activities, which breaks down into tasks. You know how much freaking work that is? And who's doing it? And I think the most important thing is, if you really want a culture of leadership, it's an issue of empowerment too. I mean, if how often do you come across employees who just like leaders would love to do the right thing, but they said, I can't because the process says, I can't because my governance says,
or I've been slapped on the wrist before when I took initiative.
Yeah, if I violate the process, although the solution for the client might be obvious. But we constrain our staff from being the leaders that they potentially could be because we don't give them that free space to maneuver and think. If you're going to, you have to trust your staff. But let's go back, because I think we have a couple of good bullet points. The first thing, and I love what you're saying, is you start at the top. What are some of the things that you do at the top? Do you do psychometrics of the leadership, or is it? I'm sure a lot of it's one-on-one conversations, kind of in a subtle sort of way. You kind of get a lay of the land. You figure who are the key players at the top, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, what I do is that I sort of walk them through initially the model that I go through, which is the 7 stages of the team performance model. And if you really think about it, there are a lot of indicators around us, both in life and at work. And there's signals, right?
Yeah.
There's signals. Like, for example, we spoke about relationships and marriages and ex-marriages and stuff like that, and what makes a relationship work.
Yeah.
There are certain signals. These are red flags.
Yeah, I was going to say red flags.
We see
red, yellow,
flags,
green flags. Yeah.
Right. Those. Hold on a second. There's something wrong. And if you ignore these red flags, you're going to pay a massive tax. It's going to be really bad because it's going to culminate into an explosive end, right? So one of the things I ask is, how do you know, hey man, Mr. Leader, how do you know that your vision is understood and adopted by everyone? Yeah. How do you know that people trust you?
Yeah.
How do you know that people's goals and roles are clear? Yeah. How do you know that people are committed? What makes you, what's your way of you knowing that people are committed? How do you know that you are implementing and what you're about to implement is going to be on time? You know, what are those indicators that tell you, hey boss, it's all good? And then how do you know that your team is going to sustain that performance so you can then say, right, how do we do it all over again without burning the shit out of everybody? Are you going to
inspect what you expect even? And do you know how to measure it? You know, and that's where you often get the...
Yeah. And let me tell you what, a lot of the answers I get are so vague and ambiguous. This is when I go, all right, guys, let's go down to basics.
So you have your...
I don't do that to really undermine the leader's ability. I mean, I greatly understand what leaders go through. I go through it as well with my organization. But you have to give them such a strong reality slap that for them to say, right, then what do we do? Then let's work on the basics. Grab that toolbox. Let's see what's in it and what's not. For example, Mark, if I want to change a light bulb, I'm going to go to my toolbox. I'm going to grab the right toolbox. I'm going to change a light bulb with a hammer. And unfortunately, that's the kind of analogy that I use. Is a lot of managers want to fix a light bulb with a hammer. Well, you're not going to do that.
Yeah.
You know, and if you do, then you are the ultimate victim of what I call, and we see that a lot, which is called the Peter principle. You know, managers and leaders get promoted to the level of their incompetence, so they go up to that level. And if you as a manager, you had this competence here, right? And then you dealt with it successfully, and then I come to you and say, "Good job, Mark. I'm going to promote you as a director." Yeah. Well, then you have you here, and then the old habits and skills that you have no longer work at the top. So now you're on top, right? And you're empty. Your toolbox that is supposed to have full of these things to make you a better director.
And you've never done it before, empty. And it's different when you're there, and you're suffering under imposter syndrome, which is normal. It's okay, but how do you deal with it?
But then the way you deal with it, unfortunately, is they go back down to the old toolbox and they use the old skills for their current role and their current, responsibilities. Yeah. They end up competing against their team. They end up playing a glorified manager's role by title, and they end up making a lot more damage than good. So that's why I'm saying is, what do we do? Go back to basics. And make sure that those evergreen tools that are in your toolbox are there no matter what position, no matter what level of seniority you are in or at, that those 7 evergreen skills, those are always there. They are sharpened. You use them by knocking things out of the park, and they become part of your leadership brand.
That's our second cliffhanger into the structure. We're going to lead the people along, but let me maybe say there's a couple things I'd like to add. Number one, I'd like to make a disclaimer, because you and I have a very similar style. And it's the reason why my nickname is the PM Cowboy. Some people say, that cowboy is somebody who shoots and then asks questions. No, I'm not that type of cowboy. But cowboys are selective when they speak, but when they speak, they're fairly direct. It's kind of no nonsense. Let's make a disclaimer for all those executives who might feel like we're stepping on their toes. If you feel that we're stepping on your toes, maybe that would be a red flag for you to consider how this is resonating with you, because we are not here to poo-poo on executives. We have absolute empathy for executives. You
Yes.
are in an executive position. I've been in an executive position several times. It's not an easy job to be in. And having to come to terms with having a huge amount of responsibility and a lack of immediate skill sets to always solve them is a paradox. I often say the number one skill set that a leader has to develop is the ability to be comfortable with the unknown, but with the proactive stance of being able to figure it out, primarily by relying on the people below them to support them. And that's part of leadership culture. So what I love about what you said is step one, starting at the top. I think most people would agree with you, but I'm going to tell you my real life experience. In a lot of the companies where I do leadership trainings or coaching, it's kind of often a remote leadership group who wants to stay in headquarters and don't write me, don't call me unless it's a special occasion or because I'm busy. And then they'll come to me and say, yeah, we lack in leadership in the organization. And they said, you know what? Let's like a salt shaker. Let's do some leadership trainings in the middle, right? And my experience is the middle is very receptive to this kind of stuff, but I often get kind of the indirect feedback. This is great, and we would love to do some of this stuff. But
I wish my manager was here.
It's not supported by the top. So
yeah.
for me to do this would be me going out on thin ice.
Yeah, and you hear, I wish my manager was here listening to what you're telling us and what we're discussing, Hayssam.
Yeah. So that's that.
That's an indicator.
The second thing I want to underline, the second step after dealing with the top is you go right down, you work your way through the bottom, right? And I'm assuming you do a lot of the things that I do. You go to lunch with people, right? You go you hang out in the coffee room. You know, I often say I don't smoke cigarettes, but if people go smoke cigarettes, I often go with them, right? I usually say I'm an external consultant and look at me suspiciously. But, you know, if you talk to them for 10 minutes, if you talk to them for about 10 minutes, they'll test you. You know, what's he made of? Can he take some critical thought? And then, when they realize you're listening, you get all this wealth of feedback and insight into a company that most companies would pay a lot of money to get, right? And sometimes you write a report for upper leadership, and the first feedback that I often get from them is, "How do you know so much about my company?" I said, "Because I asked your staff. I talked to your staff, right?" So the second part is management by walking around, which is a gold principle of leadership. What's your third step after kind of identifying the gaps? What's the next step?
So the next step is getting down to how do we make that work? How do we then link what the top is thinking and doing and saying to what is really happening in the front line is we sit down with the right stakeholders, and depending from one organization to each other, could be L&D, could be HR, could be the operations team, could be the executive committee, whatever it is, right? You say, right, guys, this is what our finding is all about here. So we are going to make sure that whatever we deliver is going to speak the languages of both the management, the middle management, and the frontliners. And then there has to be accountabilities at all three levels. Yeah. Then we need to ensure that if managers are accountable, and because how we say, that leaders are responsible. What about practicing accountability? You hold yourself accountable for certain things rather than saying, "Oh, well, I'm putting you through some training, guys, and you guys should be able to fix it." And the guys are going, "Oh, could you come down here for a few days and just sit with us and understand what the hell's going on here?" So, but when the leader goes, "Listen, this is where we believe I've gone wrong, and this is what we need to. What do you think? And this is the findings." And if those findings are spot on, and then the leadership at all levels kind of say, "Yep, we've dropped the ball here, and that's what we're gonna do." And then remember what we said: there's a responsibility from the team towards the leaders, and then we're going to challenge the team members is, what are you going to do towards making sure you support your leadership? Because I'm not going to sit there and vilify the leaders only. I'm going to say, what are you doing? Well, what are you doing to make sure that if you want to be happy and if you want to manage upwards, what are you going to do? What's your responsibility, not just towards your objective, but also towards your leadership? Because now your leadership is saying, we're going to lay it out on the line. I'm going to wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm going to be vulnerable and hold myself accountable for certain things.
So there's
many different things that could be done within an organization when it comes to employee engagement. And by the way, employee engagement program could be so bloody simple. A lot of people think that employee engagement is about, getting together and having some team building activities and playing a little bit of foosball in the break room. That's bullshit. Engagement is about listening, providing people a platform to talk and voice out and do it on a regular basis. That's what engagement is all about, and get people feel that I'm part of that organization.
A colleague of mine recently told me about an experience that he had where he was called in to do a master retreat for an executive team. And he was called in and they basically told him, listen, don't give us so many inputs, let's just do a lot of games. And they basically did one game after the other, these things where you build bridges or, lavas, and all the wonderful games. And he said it was probably one of the most frustrating experiences for him. And they at the end, he got great feedback. Everybody loved it. But the red flag, I guess you would immediately say, you're probably hearing a couple red flags already, is what is the executives team's commitment to even be open to reflect, not just, hey, we're here to have fun, okay, but what are these games actually teaching us? What's the metaphor? What's the analogy? What consequence does it have for us in an operational setting? Was lacking, and he said it was probably one of the most frustrating workshops that he had ever had. But to put it into different words, so what you say for you, step number 3, and you say it with such, with such experience, but I want to make sure for those who don't have your experience that they have this simple to follow structure. So number 1, you talk with top leadership and you do your assessments there. Number 2, you work your way down to the bottom and gather information and identify gaps.
From the bottom, absolutely.
Yeah. Number 3, you create you start developing a master plan that entails a bunch of different things. An identification.
I call it the stakeholder canvas.
Yeah. What's the
stakeholder canvas?
What are the stakeholder environment? What are the different roles and responsibility? What are the different levels in the organization? You probably intertwine that with what from a strategic level, what's wanted, from a tactical level, what's relevant, and what's on an operational level, what would be practiced. You also said something which I absolutely agree. If you can't measure something, you can't improve it, right? Accountability you were talking about. But what are we measuring and how are we measuring? And in German there's a wonderful saying, if you measure the wrong thing, what you end up getting is crap. And the funny thing is, measuring is in German and crap are words that are very, very close to one another, right? So wer misst, kriegt Mist, which means if you measure garbage, that's what you get, right? So so what you do is you create a structure, a framework, maybe probably also vocabulary, right? I'm guessing that a lot of this also has to do with individual coaching, team coachings, and trainings that you do then throughout the organization.
Exactly. So there is, we look at it. You're a project manager. You've got those pillars.
Yeah.
But on top of the pillars is the architects. And who are the architects? Are the management.
Yeah.
But every strong structure has a great foundation, correct? And that foundation is actionable education. Actionable education, meaning that when you deliver training and educate your team, they have to put it in action, not just to tick a box. Oh, we've trained our teams last year on multiple disciplines. Well, how do they put it in action? So obviously I can sit down and talk to you about actionable education for 3 days, but that's the message we want to send out to our listeners, is that you have to make sure that the training is actionable. So then it becomes the foundation of that architecture. Yeah. And the pillars are, what are those skills that are then tangible, that make sure that the architects are doing the right job. Yeah. So it's really, they speak to each other, right? The frontliners, what are the foundations? And by the way, the foundations are for both the frontliners, middle managers, and senior managers. That's the actionable education. That's the training where it has to deliver result. And that's what makes a great training company from just another training company.
The analogy I'm kind of coming up in my head, it's kind of maybe a little bit cheesy, but I think it's good. Top down, you've got the sun and the rain. Bottom up, you've got the earth that needs to be plowed. It needs to be receptive. You need to de-weed it. You need to make sure that it's plowed.
Super.
Then you sow the seed, because I think a lot of people, when they do trainings, it's kind of like they take a handful of really powerful and valuable seed and they just kind of throw it out there, right? And our job, and it's not always easy, is to, no matter how jaded the people are, is to motivate them and excite them and give them belief again that there's a possibility that things might change. But I always strongly encourage my clients when they book trainings with me, don't just book a training, but let's do a follow-up. Let's make an actionable learning. Let's make it, let's say, okay, we're going to meet and commit to something that you're going to do, right? Let's write it down. Let's follow up, right? Often that gets sacrificed to the day-to-day work. People say, we don't have time for that. Yeah, but a seminar is not going to change your culture. It's just going to...
No, it's not.
It's like watching a movie.
It might impact it a little bit. It might change some attitudes and some behaviors, but it's not going to be strategic.
It's kind of like watching a romance movie and say, that I felt like I'm in love, and now it's going to happen for me. No, that's not how it works. Absolutely. I think this actionable learning thing is definitely a key word. And then, so I guess what you do is you engage these people over what is a time frame. And once again, I want this to be an interesting podcast for those who are saying, listen, I want this to be actionable. I want to change. And what time frame are we usually talking about that it takes for you to have an impact on the actual leadership culture within an organization?
Look, that's a great question. Nothing happens overnight.
Yeah.
So for me, consistency is key. Let me give you an example. I know this is a cliffhanger to our model.
Yeah.
As you know, our model, and I'm sure we're going to show it to the viewers in a bit. But the model first starts with the first stage, which talks about the why. Why are we here?
Should we show it now?
Why are we doing this? Sorry?
Should we show
absolutely.
It now?
Let's show it right now.
Okay, let me pull it up. I've got it ready here somewhere. Hold on a second.
There's 7 stages of the leadership model or the team performance model. And if you want to put it on, display it on, put it on slideshow.
There we go. You tell me when to, so the why.
Super. So that's the why. And the why here, is about getting people from the get-go a sense of membership. Now, this 7 stages apply to every single scenario of team scenarios. This is existing teams working on new projects or existing projects, or new teams coming to existing teams to work on new or existing projects, or simply new teams coming together, period, to work on, so it is applicable to every single team scenario. And that is the dashboard whereby leaders can put their fingers on their organization and truly understand what needs to be done first by every single leader at every single level of the organization, starting with the guy at the top all the way down to the front, where then the frontliners need to understand exactly how do I then contribute to that vision. So the why is about sense of membership and that and where are we going, and and the WIFM, what's in it for me, right? The next stage is if you click here to the next. So now remember how I asked earlier when I said, how do you know? No, let's not. Let's just do this first here. Let's go back to the So how do I know? I go, hey, listen, Mr. Leader. How do you know, Mrs. Leader? How do you know that stage is done, is resolved, right? How do you know that? And this is where I ask leaders to put their fingers on the pulse and the ear to the ground and to say, hold on a second, observe how people behave when they come to you. That's so simple. So if it's resolved, obviously, people have a sense of purpose. They talk as if they already belong with a sense of personal fit and membership. Otherwise, you'll have a sense of uncertainty. People are asking questions. They're afraid to approach you. You can sense. So if you sense that, you better do something about it very, very quickly. And I'm going to talk about what are those skills needed to ensure that every step is resolved. Then I'll go, okay, great. So what's the next stage? Well, the next stage is simple. You go back to the next stage, which is, if you want to go there, is trust building. Now, what does that mean? It means this is when leaders are constantly, and I mean constantly, building trust. And what are those core elements of trust and credibility? And what does it need? What do we need as not just as leaders, but as an entire organization to create an environment of trust? Because that leads to your brand. It feeds into what kind of personal brand you have, and do you have really leadership credibility? And once you do that, then it permeates across the entire organization. Yeah.
If I may jump in, you're on a flow, and I don't want to interrupt you too much, but I'm sure you'll manage.
Please, stop me at every stage.
Yeah. Trust building, I think, it resonates with anybody. I think if I'm going to use the Stephen Covey model of every relationship is like an emotional bank account where you pay in and so you can take out. I'm assuming that some companies will have some equity in trust equity with existing, but it might be limited. So is it kind of also like in the beginning that you have to kind of encourage people to give credit in trust when you're going through this process?
It is that stage is continuous, and it is ever present across the. Of course, why do we put it here on the second stage? Is because could you imagine you coming and joining my organization, Mark, and say, "Hey, Mark, welcome to the organization. You need to trust me, man. We're gonna get there."
No.
In all honesty, what's the first thing that's going to go through your mind? It's called blind trust. I mean, you need to earn my trust, and I need to earn yours. That's why once you get people a sense of direction and a sense of membership, then people say, okay, right, I'm ready now to really trust my leader and to really start to also reciprocate that trust.
I'm going to jump in there. I've had this discussion several times with people, and I guess it's also, what you're used to, what your character is, and that's not a judgment, or your cultural background or stuff like that. I'm a person who likes to give trust up front, especially in new relationships, and that's kind of how we got to know each other. We hit it off right from there was no question. I trust people forthright up front. But I'm very quick to assess in the process whether they deserve that. So they have a certain leverage of credit with me when I start. But when you come into a company, some of that initial credit that people afford their employers has already been used up, and there might be some burnt ground. Okay, so I understand that there even more. You might need to rebuild trust. The trust that was disappointed.
Right. Absolutely. And we can talk about this topic for an entire day here on the trust building process. The what I want our viewers and listeners to know is that you first make sure that model becomes your dashboard, your team performance dashboard. And very simple. I often ask leaders, are you a trustworthy leader? They go, oh, yeah, I'm doing my best. Well, how do you know? Remember when I said, how do you know that each of those stages are being implemented and reserved?
How are you showing it? How are you living it?
You know what I do is I ask the question, what are the signals and or behaviors that you could potentially see from the people around you that indicate lack of trust in you? What are the signals? Because you know what? People don't come across to you to say, hey, boss, listen, good morning, how are you? I don't trust you, boss. Have a nice day.
Well,
99% of feedback is given to us non-verbally. And if you do not have that kind of a sense of situational awareness and reading the room and understanding that to pull your head out of and start to focus on the behaviors of people around you, such as, is there really a lot of caution and a lot of facade, which we know. Tell me any human being who's got enough sense on their shoulder, a head on their shoulders with enough sense. Tell me they cannot identify facade and letting you know what you want to hear and just making sure that there is what we call fake trust and what we call a false sense of forthrighteousness. We all know what that is. We all know. So when you see that as a leader, if you ignore those signals, you're going to pay, again, a massive tax. One is that your environment is going to be affected, becomes toxic. And two, your personal brand will never be powerful enough to influence people through your credibility.
I think what's also important, and you realize that I don't think we would call ourselves influencers because we don't like that word. I think we would consider ourselves advocates in what we love and what we exemplify in the world.
Absolutely.
I think I think personal brand is important, but I think once again, if you've left burnt ground before, or you're having to start over again, or you're having to reboot, I think you can ask for some trust, credit up front. But I think this is something that I found on social media. If you're very aggressive and you promise the world and you're kind of a little bit of a snake oil salesman, I think you make quicker impact than if you're honest, authentic, and talk sense.
Absolutely. Yeah,
and I think also what personas, developing a persona that's respected, I think that's a midterm goal. I don't think that's always easy to do on a short term.
Exactly, and I'm going to tell you exactly how you do that. And we're going to talk, when we go through the 7 stages, I'm going to tell you what are those 7 evergreen competencies, right? But think about it this way. You mentioned something earlier when you said, sometimes we drop the ball and we lose our credibility and trust. That's fine. That happens all the time. Yeah. But you need to be able to recover lost trust.
But it's not the end of the world.
You know what's the fastest way to recover lost trust for any leader? One is declare it. To say, hey, I effed up.
Acknowledge
Number
it.
2 is exactly, and number 2 is right the wrong through those by using one of those tools that are evergreen. You right wrong, and you say I fucked up, and you say, you know what? Yeah. This is how I'm going to show you how to recover trust from the competent side of the equation, not from the emotional side of the equation. Oh, I messed up. Forgive me, and I'm gonna make it right. No, you right the wrong from the competent side of the equation, not from apologizing.
I think one thing that we often underestimate. Number one, people's attention span is limited. So as long as you're giving them, as long as the new impressions that you're providing them paint over the negative impressions they have in the past. Most people don't really care about what happened in the past if the future's going in the right direction, right? I think people spend too much time focusing on mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. I have to focus on what we did in the past. Yeah, acknowledge it, but then move on. I think that there's this wonderful saying about how do you ride a bicycle. When you fall off a bike, you get back up on it and you keep pushing. The very fact that you keep a forward momentum is what keeps your bicycle upright. It's only when you stop putting forth effort that your bike falls over, right? So
there you go. So that is what I'm talking about is the second stage, and this is where it is ever present across the rest of the 5 stages. So now what we move forward to is, all right, guys, so while I'm consistently working on trust building, and not just in my own personal brand, but among the team and the organization, that is the responsibility of every single person in the organization. Yeah. Trust is a two-way street. So this is when we're talking about that these are the stakeholders and what is required and what kind of actionable education that needs to happen within the organization. This is where it plays a role right here. The third stage is, all right, guys, now it is about what is everybody's goal and role in the organization, and everybody must know it down to the T. When they close their eyes, they know exactly what, when, where, and how we're doing it. So you see what I mean? And still we haven't spoken about the implementation to get it done, right? We haven't spoken about that yet. So when people can see that goal so clearly, and when they know what their role is, and you know what the role is. The role is in a lot of people. Do you know that this is one of the most misused words in our field? What's your role in the company? Or I'm the managing director. No, that's your position. Your role is when do you step in and contribute? At what point in the process of things do you say, now it's my turn to contribute? Because if roles and goals are not identified so clearly, you get this irrelevant competition and people, why is he working on this? Why is she doing this? And what am I, why am I being overlooked? And the example I use about this, Mark, is, you know, have you ever watched a live Philharmonic orchestra?
Yeah, of course.
Like live?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the most beautiful experience ever. And I always tell people, please make sure it is on your bucket list item. So imagine this.
I live in Vienna, I'm lucky, I'm close to it.
Yeah, yeah, you are actually. Massive Philharmonic orchestra. I don't know how many instruments, like 100 plus instruments. Yeah. And then you have the maestro, right? And who looks like he's doing all the work. But he was really just setting the tone and he's really making sure that, you know, reminds people with tone and tempo and, you know, it looks like he's doing all the work, but who's really doing all the work is the orchestra. So the orchestra must do their part towards the conductor, the maestro, so they can support him as well, right? That's what I was referring to earlier. Now imagine this, the guy who sits in the very, very back with the little triangle, you know, that metal triangle? Imagine that this guy doesn't know when his role is. And he's standing there with his little metal stick and he's looking around all these people playing their instruments. And he goes, hold on a second, I must be doing something wrong. I must contribute. And then he goes and ruins the entire performance by dinging this thing, ding, 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 like everybody else. Well, he should have known that I strike this triangle at the beginning and I strike it at the end. Yeah. And that's still a very important role and a job. Yeah. Because when people don't do that, they have a sense of non-contribution and sense of worthlessness if they don't know their goals and their roles.
I like your analogy. I would point this out because it's kind of in line with what we said beforehand. We need to overcome this concept. I have to wait for the conductor to tell me to ding my ding. Of course, I'm going to keep an eye on. So there's a continual connection there, a visual connection. Right. We see each other, but I can follow the symphony, the piece I'm playing through the notes that I have. So I know approximately, even if the conductor were not to give me a signal, I can fill the gap, which is this kind of leadership culture that we're looking for. We need to get over this, you know, it's the conductor who without the conductor, quite honestly, most symphonies could play the whole piece without the conductor.
Without, yeah.
Right?
And if you really watch
that's a sign of positive leadership culture, that when the leader is absent for a justifiable reason, that in her or his absence, the organization still thrives.
Nailed it. One is the role of the leader is really finished. Yeah. Is when the team becomes self-led through a set of process, procedures, principles, and values that they all adapt. Yeah. Then the role of the leader is done. It doesn't mean that he's finished. I'm saying he's done. And that's why you can see in an orchestra, 70% are not really looking at the maestro. They're looking at their sheet.
Well, they know when to look. They know when it's relevant, right?
And they know when to look. Exactly.
If I may, because it's something I wrote down earlier, and it's, I think that something that pains me in my consulting work, and I often see this, is also the misconception. I think a lot of executives, out of fear and out of imposter syndrome, have a tendency to copy what other executives do without asking themselves the question, is it the right thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm going to apologize to all companies that have their headquarters in Switzerland. I'm not singling you out, but I often find this is fascinating. You know, you might have a company that's growing, right? And they say, we're growing so much, we're doing an IPO. We need, because other companies have their headquarters in Switzerland, we need our headquarters in Switzerland as well. And there's nothing wrong with that if you're still being effective in your leadership culture. But what it often leads to is this remoteness, this chasm between the head of the organization and the rest of the organization. If your factories are in Indonesia, in different parts of the world, right, and you're so far away, and you create this culture of, like, you know, we're on Mount Olympus above the clouds, right? Don't bother us unless you're delivering KPIs and giving us good news, right? I think that is counter. That is counter to what you're talking about. The conductor stands in front of the team, often with his or her back towards the shareholders, or not the shareholder, the shareholders,
Right.
to make sure that the shareholders get what they paid for, but the focus is on their team. And I think a lot of leaders think that leadership is exemplary when they're focusing on everybody else, but not on their team, and that's a big mistake.
Yeah, yeah, and we're gonna address that through the other stages that are coming. So now the next stage, which is the stage number 4, is commitment. And how do you as a leader ensure that everyone is committed? And then not only that, but how do you know when people are and when people are not? Again, you take a look at those red flags and do not ignore them. Don't ignore those red flags. And what usually happens is the biggest indicator of non-commitment is dependence and resistance.
Yeah,
and we know when people are being dependent and resistant. You know, there's the finger pointing and the resistance to decisions and initiatives and requests. Is like, why are we simply overlooking this? Is as if you're trying to drag the horse to the water and force them to drink. Yeah. You can't do that.
Yeah.
So therefore, one of the things you go, hold on a second. Usually when people are dependent and they're resistant is because you go back 2 steps. 1, they do not know what their role and the real goals are because they don't see it. There's no goddamn transparency, and they don't trust it.
Yeah.
So then this is when the leader goes, okay, I need to go back to basics. Communicate, identify what are those trust elements that are not happening. So make sure that people see what the goals and the roles are, and then suddenly, oh my God, voila, poof, you'll see people go, okay, now I get it. But the mistakes that leaders make is they go, I got some things, I got stuff to do, I got objectives to achieve, I got responsibilities.
We have excuses for not doing what we said we were going to do.
Of course. And they overlook the commitment stage, and they expect that the next stage, if you want to show it here, Mark, is they expect that we're going to implement things on time.
Yeah,
I'm going to expect that,
Let me jump in before we get to the next subject. You talked about beforehand personal brand, and I think a lot of people say, I think this is a tradition. You know, if you think back 30 years ago, Lee Iacocca was one of the first persons who exemplified this concept of creating a personal brand, and regardless of how great he was as a leader, he was great at his personal brand, and he fulfilled a certain part. Other people that followed suit would be Jack Welch, Steve Jobs, were all examples of people who were comfortable being on stage and playing that. But I'm going to go a step further, because what you're saying is gold. If the only person in your company who is that is your CEO, you're screwed, because the personal brand, when you go back to the role, is something that has to be able to be divided down. So if we're going back to the hotel example, from the doorman to the dishwasher to the general manager of the hotel, everybody knows what is my area of influence. What am I empowered to do? How do I know what the vision is? But more importantly, do I know what potential I have to impact that? And am I empowered? And the other thing is, and this is what you're kind of referring to, and I don't want the listeners to miss this, is you got to create a safe space for people to try things out, because it's going to be new to them. Some of these practices will be new to them. You know, they'll be uncertain. You have to create safe spaces where they can practice and they get feedback, right?
There you go. You said it, because this is where this is the toolbox I'm going to tell you. So you know that there's commitment. When you allow people to see their shared vision, when the resources are allocated where people are not competing against those resources and those budgets, and when there's organizational decisions, that people are making decisions together at different levels. You know what I mean? That people feel a sense of contribution, and that, hey, my voice matters. I've got a platform to at least participate, no matter how tiny it is. Yeah. Otherwise, the smallest position across the organization is going to throw a monkey wrench in your entire thing. And there's a story that I'm sure we spoke about before, and it's a story that I absolutely adore, about when John F. Kennedy, the last real American president, was touring NASA's facilities, and he saw that janitor who's rigorously cleaning the floor. And, he was known to be down-to-earth individual. And he walks up and he goes, "And what are you doing here? And what's your role in this here?" And he goes, "Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon." And that's a janitor. So I often ask my participants, now I want you to take a look at that answer. Look at the answer and imagine the quality of that guy's cleaning. If he believes that this janitor is helping to put a man on the moon, think about the quality of his output and his cleaning. You can probably eat off the floor, because that's what I mean when everybody has a shared vision from the very beginning of the first stage as to why, pourquoi, le raison d'être is the reason for being. My ikigai is then ever present here. Then people are highly committed. No matter what their role or the goal is, they feel that they are part of the big machine, rather than become a monkey wrench in that machine.
I want to double down on that because it's so profound. I want to tie something that you said beforehand, which I would absolutely agree. I think everybody is by themselves. I think we can generalize this. The majority of people are self-motivated and want to be good people, and they want to contribute. And if they join a company, they do it through conviction. And sometimes that conviction gets lost in the mechanics of things. And I think what we really have to underline here is leadership is a team effort, not an individual effort. But for that to happen, you have to create a culture that allows and empowers. I'm going to give you an example. My son is he did an internship. He's at the end, he's finishing up his BA in business administration. He just did his first internship, which wasn't so happy with. But he's doing a second internship where he's very, very happy. And he has a great mentor. And what his mentor said to him, he said, "You know what? You need to kind of slowly but surely develop a way from always coming to me as your lead to say, well, what do you want me to do next? What do you want me to develop next? And if you really want to have a career here, then you have to develop self-initiative and come forth and come, see things and develop things and make suggestions." And that was a wonderful statement, but my son countered completely legitimate. He said, "Well, I don't have access to anybody. The only person I have access to is you. You're my bottleneck. I'm not involved in meetings. I don't know what the agendas are. I don't have an overview of what initiatives or project. He's chomping at the bit. He would like to like most of us when we were young. We wanted to conquer the world. We wanted to change the world and make it a better place. But the question is, and this is not I'm not being negative here. I'm just saying I think one of the things that leaders have to also acknowledge is how much are they consciously and subconsciously contributing to the bottleneck function?
Yeah.
How much are they empowering? Are they really letting go? I think it doesn't just require trust from the staff to the leaders for leadership to work. It has to work the other way. You have to trust your leaders and your staff members. Otherwise, you're not going to have this. People are not going to pick up the ball that you drop unless they say. I don't know how many companies I know that if a leader dropped the ball, everybody would stand around and be looking at each other, and they'd be looking at the leader, and is he going to pick it up? Who's going to move?
Well, there's some organizations that actually celebrate when their leader drops the ball.
Yeah, who are chomping at the bit and say, "Here, I got it. Let me pass it back to you." It's kind of like a rugby game, You're not going to stand around and wait for.
Unfortunately,
it's not.
Unfortunately.
Leadership is not a one man, one woman show. Yeah, absolutely.
No, it's not. And if you really think about it, commitment is such a big word. I call it the big C word. And. It comes with so many shapes and forms, and I will talk about these leadership toolbox and the evergreen. How do you make sure that there's commitment across all levels, and how do you make sure that you've got an organization that is a well-oiled machine? Now, of course, I'm gonna remind everybody here. We're talking about the ultimate stages, but we're talking about also is what happens when you see a red flag. This is what the models tell you. Hold on a second. There's something wrong with commitment. Fix it quickly. That's all we're saying. I'm not saying that if you apply that tool that everybody's going to become committed and going to sing kumbaya. No, it's not. I'm saying is open your eyes, put your ear to the ground and your fingers to the pulse of the organization. And when you see signals of non-commitment, such as dependence and resistance, nip it at the bud immediately.
But also see it as an opportunity to learn. See it as an
and to
opportunity
adjust
to learn.
and to
because
pivot.
this is an ongoing thing that we have with project management. You know, there's this old saying in failing to plan equals planning to fail, right? But it's a paradox. So, but we all know the plan never happens the way you think it's going to. So a lot of people, when they hire consultants, they think, the consultants are going to give me, a step-by-step. It's a recipe. I'm doing Jamie Oliver, right? I just do this thing, and then my pie will be exactly the way I want it. That's not reality.
I wish it was that easy.
Reality is, consultants, guides, coaches can give you a generic framework. They can help you adjust. But the second quote, which is the opposite side of planning, failing to plan equals planning to fail, is the famous philosopher Mike Tyson. I've said this quote 100 times on my podcast. One of my favorite quotes from him is, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face," and that's what you're addressing. Expect that the plan will never come to fruition 100% the way you plan, but that is actually part of the process. Part of the process is that things are not going to go 100%. But the question is, how do you deal with it? Do you roll with the punches? Do you adjust? Right? How do you deal with adversity? And how to identify
it, Mark? How to identify it? How to actually spot it, rather than allowing your cognitive dissonance and your ego to say, I'm not going to deal with it right now. I got a bigger fish to fry. And that's super dangerous. You're going to pay a massive tax.
I think I like this model. Thank you. What's the next step?
So now think about it now. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. This is when the rubber meets the road. It's the 5th step. This is where the ball bounces and you got the takeoff, which is your step number 5 is implementation. How do we get people to implement, organization to get shit done, right? So obviously you need a certain tool here to reach out into your toolbox that you use here to make sure that shit is getting done. Your team needs that toolbox of their own to get stuff done. But again, at this stage, you look at that most leaders, they go from orientation as to why and go, yalla, let's get things done. And they go straight to step number 5. Let's get this. And they overlook step number 2, 3, and 4. And they wonder why there's massive failure all around.
Well, they're getting things done, but the process of getting things done doesn't just because different instruments are playing, whatever they're playing doesn't make it a symphony.
Exactly. There you go. So now again, you need to put your ear to the ground and your finger on the pulse of the organization and listen up and be situationally aware and 360. You have that 360-degree radar around you and go, hold on a second. If people are implementing on time, great, fantastic, beautiful. But if there's no implementation, rather than start to shoot from the hip, which unfortunately some managers do, is understand, hold on a second, where the confusion is. Where can we learn from conflict? And where are the non-alignment issues and why are we having these missed deadlines? And this is when you go into, root cause analysis, discussions, and making sure that you are delegating and becoming a situational leader and try to get to the root cause of things rather than just shoot from the hip and start to swing your bat left and right. Because that's where you can pivot here. You can really quickly pivot. Pivoting is something that can only happen under certain conditions, which is you need to know how to pivot. That's what great teams do. They pivot quickly rather than wait till the shit hits the fan.
If we stay with the analogy of the orchestra, right? A conductor will maybe halt the orchestra when it plays and says, listen, up till here you played well, I want you to change this. You work on it together. Kind of the concept of retrospectives, and I think it's really, really important, is leadership is not a destination, it's a road that needs to be traveled over and over again. And it's not always going to be perfect, but that's the whole plan, do, check, act cycle that you need to do. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And then to be able to quickly respond to situations in order for you to go to the next step is to say, right, high performance. Wow, this is now, we got there, right? Now, again, the leader and the team, they need to reach out to their respective toolbox and to make sure that there is sustained performance, and how do you make sure that that Ferrari that you have built that's going at 200 miles an hour that is gonna deliver on result is again, put your fingers to the pulse and ears to the ground and look for signs of disharmony and overload. The minute you see that, you better stop. You better take a breather. You better, hey, fall in, guys. Let's do a huddle and understand what's going on. What do you need from me? What's happening? What's next? You know what I mean? This is
what do
where
you need from me is one of the most powerful sentences that a leader must say on a regular basis.
Yeah. So you're asking me what's the most powerful sentence the leader should say on a regular basis?
No, I'm saying that's one of them. Is what do you need from me?
Yeah, absolutely. How can I support you?
Servant leadership.
Right? How can I support you? What do you want from me? Right. Yeah. So therefore, it is important here that the leader reaches into the right toolbox, into the toolbox for the right tool, in order for him or her to maintain that sort of performance. Right. So in order for you to ensure that there is this flexibility and intuitive communication between people and a lot of synergy without too many meetings and too many checkpoints and milestones, khalas, people know what they're supposed to do. If you really know how to launch that skill here, right? So then what? Okay, so my team now is performing. That Ferrari is just metal to the pedal, or pedal to the metal is going up. The seventh stage is all right, guys, how can we do this all over again? Why should we continue? How can we, in Arabic we say an Eid al-Karra. It means repeat it over and over again without burnout, without boredom. And again, to go back to the first stage is, all right, here we go. Let's do this again. Because performance is a beautiful drug that you can overdose on. If you use it in the right dosages, it gives you the right performance. If you overdose on performance, you're gonna run your team to the ground. So this is where leaders need to know, how do we do this all over again? And how do we pivot again once more time and adjust to situations, markets, conditions, culture, people. And then the whole cycle starts again from the why on the next project, the next team, the next initiative, and the next strategic objective. And this is a continuous cycle here.
Great.
So now a lot of people say, what does that toolbox look like? Right? So if you click down, each of those stages, I have identified a tool that must exist in the leader's toolbox. When you talk about orientation, leaders here must be incredibly influential in their communication and fantastic storytelling. You know, now we're talking about storytelling, whether it's in training, whether it's in leadership, whether it's communicating vision. Leaders need to master these two things, influential communication and storytelling. And not only that, you need to sound like a broken record about your vision, about your goals, about the why. Because if you don't sound like a broken record, you're not communicating enough. So that's where I believe leaders, instead of focusing on just the output and the results, focus on how do I communicate the vision, how often, and how do I inspire people through storytelling.
Yeah. I came across on Instagram an old video, which I love very much, of Steve Jobs. Now I'm going to say this: Steve Jobs was a great person and a great leader in many ways, but he was a terrible person in others. So I'm not equating one with the other, but. It was a great video because he was in one of those classical scenarios where he was on stage and an expert programmer calls him out. Okay, he was an open plenary and they asked for questions, and this guy and you could just tell by his demeanor that this guy was a senior expert on systems and programming, and he calls Steve Jobs out and he says, Listen, I just want to point out, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Several of the things you've said so far are completely incorrect, okay? And he basically challenges him as a leader, and he says, what qualifies you to even decide anything in a company? What have you actually contributed? So, which I think a lot of staff members who are subject matter experts might ask upper management, what's upper management good for? And I have to give Steve Jobs credit. He gave the perfect leader's response. The first thing he did is he jokingly held up a chair like he was trying to fend off a lion. And then the next thing he said, he sat down on the chair and he said he thought about it, which I think is brilliant. I think that it's not your job to be fast to respond and then come out looking like a hero. I think it's about receiving the message, and he really received the message. And he wasn't insulting. He wasn't defensive. He says, you know what? He basically doubled down on what his role was. His role was not the programming aspect, but his role was to see the big picture. And he says, you know what, I profoundly respect my subject matter experts, but sometimes they don't see the big picture, and that's what my job is. They think that the concrete example is often programmers say, you know what, I'm in love with this programming element, let's develop it and then let's sell it to the customer. And he said, my job as a CEO is the conductor, right? I've got to ask myself the other question, what is it that a customer might need? And then I work backwards and see if I can't link it with things that we have. A little bit of a long story, but what I loved about the response was it was an example of leadership, because he was open to the criticism. He was not defensive. He did not go on the counteroffensive and call a guy a bunch of names. He acknowledged what he had to say. He came back with legitimate counter where he explained his position and his role, okay? And it made sense. And it was, for me, an amazing example of often...
And that's a perfect story, because it plays into the second tool for the second stage. Is what is the second tool in that box? Is it talks about personal branding and leadership credibility through emotional intelligence. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is that you have to have a personal brand that you invest in, just like you invest in the commercial brand of your organization. You invest in your brand, where the minute people think about you, whatever that brand you set forth to build is going to cross their mind, because that, in my opinion, is one thing that leaders overlook, because they look at their results who speak volumes about themselves. Not true, and you know that. So personal branding and emotional intelligence for the second stage. The third one is, hey, man, I need to be a strategic thinker in terms of strategic thinking, strategic planning, to get people to understand how do they contribute to that overall vision through distribution of the right goals and the right roles for the entire organization, and people feel a sense of membership no matter how big and how small their role is, right? And then you go, okay, listen, great. Fourth tool that is in line with the fourth stage, which is commitment, and that talks about inspirational leadership and motivation. And I know we talk a lot about that, and I know that but we are human beings. We need to be motivated, and we know also that not everyone is motivated by the same thing. Impossible. So again, this is where your situational leadership here and your emotional intelligence starts to play out. Is that, how do I motivate Mark? Mark is not motivated like Hayssam is motivated. Ibrahim is motivated by money. Mark is motivated by accomplishment. Hayssam is motivated by a sense of accomplishment and leadership legacy. And this is when leaders start to speak an individual language by knowing which button to press, rather than using one single form of motivation, which is, hey, you guys are going to get a big bonus.
Well, even if you could generically lump it together, I think Dan Pink has a great video on there where he talks about what are the three key motivators based on science, and that you can generically apply them to all. I think one was mastery, the second was belonging to a higher vision. And I forget what the third one was. I'll think of it in just a moment.
Can I break the mold?
Even if you have these generic models, what you're saying, just so somebody doesn't misunderstand you, Hayssam, I wanted to add, I agree with you. What you're saying is that applying those three generic motivating factors will be different from person to person.
Exactly. And can I tell you how break the model? It's a bit of a guesswork here, what motivates people and stuff like that. And let me tell you what the simplest way is. Whenever we're working on a project or initiative and I'm talking about the stakeholders, you know what I do? I go, hey, Mark, come here. What's going to motivate you right now, Mark, in order for us to achieve this together?
Yeah.
How many leaders do you actually hear them say that or ask this question? What's going to motivate you right now? And you know that motivation is personal and situational. It changes from situation to situation and from person to person. But when I come to you and say, hey, Mark, listen, buddy, I really need your help here. I need to rely on this set of skills that you have and these competencies. But for this project, what is going to motivate you? And Mark might say, you know what, just give me some extra responsibility and leave me alone. Don't just hover over my head. Or Hayssam might say, you know what, just give me some feedback on a regular basis. This is how you find out. You hit two birds in one stone. You are a situational leader, a human being, and you understand what motivates people in that situation on that project because it shifts. Yeah. It's a constantly shifting goalpost.
The third factor that Dan Pink refers to is self-determination. So that area, and once again, that's also different based on what your role is and how much you want of it. Yeah, so absolutely, I agree with you. Yeah.
For sure. So then they go, okay, great. The fifth is about, again, situational leadership and effective delegation. Man, I cannot tell you enough about how important that is. Do what you do best and delegate the rest. You know what I mean? Just don't get bogged down, Mr. and Mrs. Leader, with these tiny things and micromanaging and, suffocating your team. Do what you do best and delegate the rest. And of course, there is a whole workshop on purely delegation. And that we use the situational leadership model when you delegate here as well. And we all know what the sit-lead model is. And this is when I believe these are where the tried and true and tested models play a good role here, but you need to know when to use them, not just as, interesting concept. Well, how the hell do I put it into action? So here, the skill that you need to master, dear leaders, is effective delegation, like really be an awesome delegator. And of course, we move on to the last two, is my favorite of all. Stop managing and start coaching, ladies and gentlemen. Stop managing and start coaching. Put your coach's hat on and become a coach, a mentor, and someone who creates other fantastic, awesome leaders, because you eventually want your job and your role to be done. Your role to be done and to make sure that you've built a self-led organization with you as this awesome maestro. This is when the maestro flexes his or her muscles. Yeah, I coach. And coaching is a skill. That's the skill that I need to reach into my toolbox and use it on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And of course, great, I've done this, and it's about change management and the future of AI. And if you notice here, I put something about AI leadership. I mean, leadership is changing, communication is changing.
You have to throw that in there, even if nobody knows what it means. You have to put that in there.
100%. You become a change manager and you pivot accordingly, but you need to understand, how does AI and your leadership going to play out in the next 6 months? And I mean it, 6 months to a year. Things are accelerating so quickly. And if you're not on board that gravy train, if you're not a leader in the future, so make yourself future-proof, your organization future-proof, you are going to fail miserably. And I mean miserably, no matter how great you are. And that's the toolbox that I urge leaders today to make sure they have those 7 evergreen tools and competencies and skills.
There's 2 things that come to mind after what you've talked about. They're fairly separate, but I've written them down. So let's go through it. You use the word coaching. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a semantic difference between coaching and mentorship. Do you want to say something about that? Because I think they both have their place and their role depending on the maturity of the relationship.
Yeah.
Where would you see the differentiation, or do you differentiate?
Yeah. There's many differentiations. The ones that I can make it, that I can simplify for our viewers and listeners is, I go, I go, a mentor is somebody that you covet, somebody who is within or outside of your organization, because you look up to them and they are a role model, and say, I want you to mentor me because I love what you've done and what you've achieved in your personal brand. So I come and covet you. You know what I mean? So therefore, I don't believe that managers should be mentors unless they are coveted. However, managers must be coaches, whether you're coveted or not. You have to put that hat on, whether your team likes it or not. Now, how often do you coach people? Depending on, again, there's the coaching model. Some people you coach on a weekly basis, monthly basis, and a quarterly basis. That's a different story. That's for another podcast. But put your coach hat on, because you have to wear it. You don't have to be a mentor to each and everybody on your team, but you must be a coach to each and everyone on your team. That is a must in your leadership toolbox. And that is a tool that you use constantly. No matter how good, how great, or how much struggle these team members are facing, you must coach. Stop managing and start coaching.
Yeah. I like your definition. I would agree with you. I think coaching is more operational. It's more tangible. It's a more day-to-day thing. Has a higher level of involvement. I think that's important for managers. I would agree with you. I think mentorship is something, when you have one person removed, that an important role, but maybe a more distant role.
And just to add, sorry to interrupt you, Mark, and to add, and again, some people might disagree with me. There's a lot of mentorship programs within organization, and I worked with a few organizations where they implemented the mentorship program, and that too, if you notice, one of the first steps in the mentorship program is how to match the right mentee to the mentor. And usually the mentee plays the role into that by making sure that there's certain elements that plays into, I have to like that person. I have to be able to look up to them, and that person have to have the time for me. You see how it is? Even internally is coveted. You
brought it up, the AI. AI is one of my buzzword topics that I like. Two snippets of information I picked up. I think just this morning on Instagram, or it was on LinkedIn, saw that, as always, Dubai is on the cutting edge of modern technology. I think the prince, I forget his name, that was responsible for the AI initiative, had said something that they want to be the first country that has 10,000 AI initiatives or corporations by a certain time, which I think is ambitious, and I think it sets vision, it sets tone, it sends opportunity out there. But I'm going to go to a different report that I recently saw, which I sense. One of the big problems that a lot of companies are facing with the AI initiative is concerning is a lot of them have pressure from the top to do something, but the what and the why is not clear. So, it's kind of this blind, hey, we're doing something on AI, we don't know why we're doing it, and if we do something, we don't know what it's good for. There's a lot of, in Germany we would say, a lot of empty kilometers being run because people feel the pressure, but and I think that's another, and I think the constructive part of this statement is, I don't think anybody doubts the fact that AI has potential, but I think part of what good leadership is the ability and the willingness to dare to think independently and ask yourself the question, and when somebody says we need AI, is to ask yourself the question, why do we need it?
And what I'm talking about, the AI leadership, is not whether we need it or not. Eventually we are going to need it. I'm saying also, on top of what you're saying as well, is that how do I manage a workforce, organizations that are going to be AI dependent? Because then, remember what AI is doing. There's pros and cons, in my opinion. People start thinking on their own. They become less empathetic. They become more dependent on AI. Their sense of creativity is out the door. And of course, they become more efficient also. So therefore, you need to increase your efficiency as well. The guy of the NVIDIA's CEO, when he had a coding conference, and one of the coders stood up and he says, with AI and ChatGPT, coding becomes accessible to everybody. What's the new coding language? And he goes, English. Start knowing how to speak to the thing and become a good prompt engineer. And a lot of people use it like they use Google. So therefore, even us as leaders, we need to be leaders of the future. We become not only the organization future-proof, but you as a leader, if you don't know what AI and how to use AI, those kids that are 20, 25 years old, they're going to come and take your job in no time.
So people, I'm not convinced of that. I'm not.
Hold on a second.
I think they're going to have.
Hold on. I'm not finished. So the reason is I'm saying is AI is not going to replace people, but AI. People are going to disappear people who don't know how to use AI. That's what it is. It's not that AI is going to replace people, but people who know how to use AI.
It's a leverage.
Exactly, it's going to give them leverage. That's exactly what I was talking about. That's what I'm saying.
It's a
leaders
new,
today must be on that gravy train.
It's a new tool. It's a new weapon. I don't like the word weapon, but it's a new powerful tool that if we don't know how to use, you're going to have a disadvantage towards other people who are just as good as you and do know how to use it.
A workforce that's depending on it as well.
I think the reason I picked this topic out is, once again, I don't want to poo-poo on AI. I think there's a huge potential, but I think it has an even greater potential for true leadership. Where I had Alyssa Farrow on many podcasts ago who talked about this, and I said, where does one start as a company that wants to look at AI? And she says, the first thing you have to do is you have to sit down and you have to ask yourself the difficult questions. What are our principles? What do we want? What is the overall picture? I think that's the responsibility of leadership, not just to say, hey, let's do AI, and then leave it up to everybody else to kind of figure it out. I think it's a difficult landscape. It requires some thinking, right? And AI is not going to do the thinking for you. Is to ask yourself the question, where do we need AI? What are the weaknesses? How do we prevent the weaknesses before we all jump on the bandwagon? Are we doing it differently? And I'm going to give you an example. I think, since you have a strong service background as well, right? Customer satisfaction. I think one of the biggest potentials that we have, negative potentials we have with AI, is that we're going to have less human interaction. And if we're not careful, whatever bad practice you have will be accelerated. I don't know if you know the famous Little Britain sketch where somebody tips into the computer and it says, "Computer says no," right? That's a big danger that we have, and that doesn't mean that's not, you can't alleviate that. But I think the bottom line is AI is not going to relieve us of our responsibility. So
no, it's not.
Although AI is the beginning of that word, AI leadership. Actually, what comes before and after the word AI is leadership.
Yeah. Exactly. Leadership in the age of AI, so to speak.
Yeah. I think that's important.
Fantastic.
I like this model.
Wonderful. By the way, just a little disclaimer. I've used this model for many years, and I've built on it, and I've sort of evolved it to match what I do and how it could actually serve my leaders that I work with. It's the team performance model by Drexler and Siebert. And I've added also, there's another layer to it. Talk about the leadership toolbox, and the other layer is the team toolbox, whereby both of those competencies are parallel. Remember what I said? The responsibility of the leader versus the responsibility of the team towards the leader, and vice versa. And those are the skills that are evergreen for both leaders and team members. And my workshops is built around those 7 stages for both leaders and team members.
I'm hoping that we've made this interesting, easy to follow, and also motivate a bunch of people to reach out to you. We'll make sure to put your link in there. You can be reached over LinkedIn, but we'll also put your link in the bottom.
Please do.
You too are leaders, so you don't just preach, right? You practice. Your company is thriving and growing also in the GCC area and beyond. What are some of the, I guess sometimes it's my wife is a doctor, and it's always funny when she says, I have this issue, I have this ailment. I said, well, do you know a good doctor? In your case, you're also a CEO. You have a team that you lead. You're very active on social media. You've got a lot of ambitious initiatives and projects ahead of you. Do you know a good leadership coach that can help you in your endeavors? What are your plans for 2026?
I'm open. I'm really, really open. I'm open. I'm actually one of my objectives for next year is to work with a mentor. I've identified 2 or 3 mentors that I'd like to work with. I'm also a kind of person who's open for feedback. I take feedback very, very seriously, but I don't take it personally.
Yeah.
Sometimes I take it personally because, I'm human and I tend to defend it, but I defend it for the right reason. And then I love it when I'm called out. It's like, hey, Hayssam, just take it as feedback. And I'm a person who's constantly growing. I'm not claiming to be the perfect coach nor the perfect human being, but I'm claiming to be somebody who cares, someone who works closely with clients for their own successes. And it makes me proud and happy and over the moon when I see someone comes back to me and says, hey, Hayssam, thank you so much. What you've done and what we've done together and how you've helped me has really accelerated my growth and my career. And that for me is the biggest absolute payoff that anyone can have. This is why I do it constantly. No matter how many days a month I work and how many countries I cover, I do it because I believe I'm changing the world one person at a time. And I love what I'm doing. Therefore, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like a sense of calling and a sense of my purpose in life. It's my ikigai.
Yeah. Let me ask you one more question that kind of popped up earlier, but I didn't have the opportunity to slip it in. We're different, but in many ways similar. We're both global citizens that have a strong cultural basis that we come from, but we transcend it often. How much does culture play a role in the overall leadership perspective?
Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah. But
period.
Would you say that the leadership principles that we talked about, I don't know if we'd say transcends, but still is present in every culture?
Those 7 stages and those 7 evergreen tools is what's going to shape healthy cultures.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I believe that when leaders master those 7 tools and ensure those 7 stages are present in all initiatives, there you go. That's a high performance culture.
Yeah.
And
I would probably add from my experience, I think I've never been afraid of meeting a different culture. I think one would be unwise to think that the diversity might eventually be a challenge in the overall moving forward. But if it's addressed, I find that diversity is actually an absolute asset. I love to learn from other cultures, and I think it often only requires a slight adaptation to make a model like yours work sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, look, and again, that's a beautiful thing about this model is that it is extremely, again, it is a one size fits all.
Yeah.
And it's not and you can see it's very malleable and flexible. Sometimes organizations, you can take a look and say, I've got no issue with trust, but there's an issue with goal role clarification. And there's an issue a little bit on lack of commitment, not because I'm a bad leader, it's because there's a dysfunction. Fix it. This is what I'm talking about. Look at those signals. And that's by no means justifies or signals that you're failing as a leader. It's just simply, it happens. And when it does happen, fix it. And when you fix it, people understand that you're being a great manager and a great leader. That's why it's extremely malleable and flexible. And that's why it's evergreen. And I believe that's the model that's worked, at least with me and my clients.
Yeah. Very, very good. Hayssam, it's been a pleasure.
The pleasure is always mine, Mark. Thank you so much. I mean, over 2 hours have gone by and
really?
I don't even feel it.
It doesn't seem like
it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for having me on your show.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
I can't wait to see you face to face very soon.
Same here. Hayssam, thanks again for everything. Have a great rest of the year, and I'm sure we'll be bumping into each other in 2026.
Shukran, merci beaucoup, vielen Dank, my friend, and hope we see you very, very soon and hear some good news from you as well.
Thanks.